Hi, class, and welcome back to Intro to Psych. We're going to cover Chapter 11, Social Psychology today, one of my favorite chapters as I am a social psychologist. And what you'll notice is we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. And these are not necessarily connected, but these are actually almost all different chapters that I cover in my social psychology class. So if you are interested in any of these more specifically, there's a lot more out there in more depth. But what I want to do is start off with this idea of what is social psychology. So, what do we mean by that? Well, if you think about a lot of what we've done, we've talked about cognitive, and so how the mind works, how we think. We've talked about developmental, how we go from young to old. We've talked about personality, how we are who we are, but we haven't really talked about how we work together. And so, social psychology is how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, how the things we do are influenced by others. The important thing to know with this is those don't actually have to be people there. These can be imagined or implied, right? The idea that if there's a camera in the room, you might change your behavior because you think somebody might be watching. It's not necessarily a new phenomenon, though, right? You can think of religion as a way to have this implied presence of God watching you and theoretically might change your actions. And so, if we think about what we're talking about, we are going from these kind of very low level things at the beginning of the semester, our chemistry, our physiology, now into our relationships with groups and how we operate on the bigger scale. So more focused on those kind of relations between one another and how that affects us. So I always like to start off with this kind of big picture idea of social psychology, which really fits into the end of personality, that social cognitive theory. So Kurt Lewin, he is the father of social psychology. He came up with this formula to describe the fact that we are influenced by social forces in our world. And so he describes our behavior, the things we do, as a function. It's caused by two different things: who we are, the person, and the situational factors, the environment we're in, right? So why somebody after if a tornado runs through town, why some people might try to get up and get away from town, and some people might run to help their neighbors. It's the idea that the situational factors matter. And a lot of times we fail to take into consideration the situation for other people, and we only focus on it for ourselves, something we'll talk about in a little bit. But some of the social forces that influence us, right, these social influences are what we call social norms, right? So we are influenced socially. You see other people, and if they start to laugh at you, you think maybe, right, am I wearing pants? Is something wrong? Right? So these are ways that we can be influenced by each other. And one of the most influential ways are what we call social norms. So norm, right? It's in the name. It's what is considered normal. And what is considered normal can differ by culture. It can differ by, even your house you live in. But, right, there are certain things that we consider so culturally normal, we've turned them into laws, right? Like, don't kill somebody. That is actually a law, but it's also kind of a norm we have. When we talk about these norms, though, we can think about different ways we can describe them. So we can talk about prescriptive. You'll also hear these called injunctive, but I think prescriptive makes more sense, right? Because it prescribes, like a doctor would, what you should do, right? So, I think about this. I'm prescribing norms to my daughter. I'm teaching my daughter that you should say please when you ask for something, or you shouldn't litter, or bullying is something you shouldn't do. But is it always the case that people don't litter? Or is it always the case that people don't bully? Could it be different? Could there be descriptive norms, these norms about how people actually behave? Here's a couple example of some norms, right? Like, it's not normal to eat lasagna in the shower, but it's not illegal. It might feel a little strange, but we'll kind of talk about that. Right? This idea of social norms can also change over time. We all have an idea of personal space. In the United States, we're an interdependent culture. We like to be a little further away when we talk to each other. You wouldn't like if I was, right up here speaking to you. My wife actually studied abroad in Argentina, where they're a much closer culture. And so their intimate space, or excuse me, their personal space was a lot closer. And so they would talk very close to her. But that's something that's even differed now post pandemic for us, right? So these social norms can change all over. So when I teach this class in social psychology, I always break a social norm. I come to class dressed as a penguin, right? The idea here is that it's not illegal. There's nothing I'm doing that's wrong, but it's strange. It's breaking a norm. And it's such a norm breaker that somebody actually put me on the Best of College Snapchat a couple years ago, where it ended up being 500,000 people saw me. That was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. But hey, I get that to say that, right? And so why would that even make the Best of College Snapchat? Because it's not normal, it's different, it's unique. And so, right, that kind of also can be a bad thing, though, right? These norms can help maintain social order. We know to come to class clothed and in normal clothing, right? But sometimes if we follow norms just because people tell us to, this could be a problem. You think about listening to orders that you shouldn't. And I always talk about Adolf Eichmann, right, a Nazi from World War II who was convicted in the Nuremberg trials. And he is famous for saying, it wasn't me, I was just following orders, right? I was just listening to the person above me. And that's not really a good excuse, right? That's a good excuse if you're following orders to stop at a stop sign. But, right, this can go too far. One way this can go too far is what we call de-individuation. If you've ever been in a large crowd, maybe you've noticed that you start feeling less like yourself and more like part of the crowd. This can lead to what we call diffusion of responsibility, the idea that you no longer want to help somebody else, or you don't decide to help when somebody needs help because, I don't know, somebody else will help. There's other people who should be responsible. And this is a related phenomenon to the bystander effect, the idea that, if you saw somebody who fell down and was hurt, you're probably going to walk by because you assume that, somebody else will help. You diffuse that responsibility. So social influence is this really powerful thing. It's this hidden, invisible force that affects us. And I'm going to define this in 3 different ways. And we're going to start from the weakest social influence to the strongest. The first type of social influence is what we call conformity, and it's the idea of just doing what other people do. So, right, when I walk into class dressed like a penguin and people laugh at me, they don't tell me, hey, weirdo, go change your outfit, but they don't necessarily need to. If I see that everybody's dressed differently, I might go change my behavior, right? And so I might conform. I might change my behavior just because I'm pressured by what I believe somebody thinks. The next type of influence is what we call compliance, so doing as others ask. So when somebody asks us to change our behavior, if you read a sign that says, please take off your hat, right? That is going to be what we would consider a compliant, right? And you take off your hat, that's going to be a compliance thing. Not like, right, you legally have to take off your hat. It's a sign, not a cop. But the most influential type of social influence is obedience. So obeying somebody else, doing as another person commands. And there's not much of a difference between compliance and obedience. The only difference, because they're both asks, is that in obedience, this person has power over you, right? So it is the difference between you being at dinner with your friends and they ask you to, pass you the salt. In which case you're probably going to pass them the salt, but you might mess with them, right? You might say, oh, no, I'm not going to. Versus imagine that you're at dinner with your boss and they ask you to pass the salt. You're not going to mess with them, right? You are going to say, sure, here's the salt. So let's start with conformity here and, right, just changing our behavior to match other people's actions. People will get into a line because they see other people in line. People will change their clothing to conform differently because they feel a pressure. And it's not somebody actually saying something here. There's 2 reasons we would choose to conform. One of the reasons is what we call informational social influence. We look to other people for information because we want to be correct. If you see everybody running away from something, right? You just see people all of a sudden get up and run. chances are you're going to go, I better do that because there's a problem. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to follow that. Right? So other people are good sources of information about what we should do in a situation. So we might conform because, right, they must know something I don't know, and that way I can actually be prepared. The other reason we might conform is normative social influence. We want to look normal. We want to be average. We don't want to be different. We want to be liked. So, right, why would I conform to the normal dress standards? Because people are going to laugh at me if I don't, and then I would feel weird. We want other people to like us. Being liked and being part of a group is a fundamental social need. So this would be an example of a normative social influence here. If you ask somebody, hey, have you ever fallen out of your chair before? And they said no, and then you feel really awkward. So you're like, hey, yeah, I never have either. That's going to be a great example of normative social influence. You're changing your behavior to be liked, not just to be correct. What's interesting is you find conformity everywhere in a clear situation, even if everybody else is wrong. And a fascinating study from social psychology called the Asch Conformity Experiment brings participants into a research lab along with 4 other people who are in on the experiment. And what you do is you put the 4 other people who are in on the experiment, you ask them to answer the questions before the participant. And then you just ask them this very simple question. Hey, here's one line. Which line is the same length as this line? A, B, or C? It's A. But what you do is you have the 4 people in front of this person say something like, it's B, it's B, it's B, it's B. And now you're looking at this going, have I lost my mind? You don't, right? Are you going to say A or are you going to say B? Now, I'm not going to show this video. I highly encourage you to watch it. But the answer ends up being participants are more likely to go along with somebody else, to conform with somebody else and go along with the wrong answer, even though they can see the right answer. Think about what that means for doing the right thing. I'm not going to get into that, but something to think about. Moving on, let's talk about compliance, doing as others ask us to. So this could be a friend, this could be somebody with lower status, right? If you see a little kid's lemonade stand and it says, buy our lemonade, or if a friend asks you, hey, can you pick up some snacks on the way over? You could decide to do that. You could also decide not to. Now, it's important to note, right, that this doesn't always necessarily have to be the same as what you truly believe. Like if I'm balding, I'm not, but if I was balding, I might want to keep my hat on even though somebody asked me to take it off. But I might still take it off even though it doesn't fit what I like to do. With compliance, though, I'd like to talk about 2 techniques that you probably have learned, but are useful techniques to get people to comply with whatever you ask them, to get them to do what you want. This sounds a little manipulative, but these techniques are associated with compliance that we use a lot in everyday life. And, these definitions sound a lot like way they actually are. And a lot of it goes back to like door-to-door salesmen, right? So somebody coming up to your house and trying to sell you a product. So the first way to get people to comply is what we call the foot in the door effect. The idea that maybe we ask somebody for a small request to get our foot in the door, and then we start asking for more and more and more. An example of this, maybe you ask your parents for a couple dollars so you can go to the movie. They give you $10 and you say, actually, I think we're going to go out to dinner afterwards. Could I get a little more? And they give you a little bit more. And then you say, and maybe we were going to go to the mall after that. Could you give me maybe a little bit more? And so the idea is start with a small request and build up to what you actually want. So imagine that mom bakes a pie and you want to eat half the pie. And you know that if you ask, Mom, can I eat half the pie right now? She's going to say, absolutely not. No way. So you ask for 1 slice of pie and she says, okay. Then you ask for another and another, right? This is the kind of, if you give a mouse a cookie, right? So you put your foot in the door, they've already started. Now you're going to increase and increase and increase what you want. The reverse of this is the door in the face technique. The idea here is like not a used car salesman, but a door-to-door salesman, you are going to ask for a ridiculous number up front. Maybe you want 30 bucks to go out for the evening from your parents. So you start off by saying, hey, mom and dad, I'm going out tonight. Could I have 100 bucks? And they're like, what? No. Fine. How about like 30 bucks? And I'm like, well, that's okay. So, right, again, thinking, mom, I want to eat half a pie. She's going to say no. What if you start off with, mom, I'm going to eat that whole pie? And she's like, absolutely not. And you're like, fine, I'm just going to eat half of it. Well, that sounds like a lot better deal, right? So after doing something so severe, you got to slam the door in their face. You got to reject that requirement. And that makes you feel bad. So you might actually do something smaller for them in the future. So these two techniques are used in a lot of places. I think they're very helpful in terms of just kind of, I don't want to say manipulating people, but understanding how to frame questions in order to get things you might want. Finally, let's talk about obedience. And so obedience, again, is similar to compliance. We're just asking, but it's who's doing the asking. For instance, as your professor, if I ask you to do something in the bounds of the class, I have power over you here. But if the semester is over and you see me in Walmart or something and, I say, hey, you got to write me an essay today. No, you don't, right? Like I have no power over you in that case. So this also kind of matters in context here, but obedience is going to be something we've been taught since we were very little. I want my daughter to obey me because I don't want her to run into the road. That would be terrible. But, at the most extreme, could this be bad? And this comes from World War II, right? Nazi Germany, right? We think about what happened in Auschwitz. The fact of the matter is not every single German was a Nazi. Only about 33% of Germans voted in for Hitler. And so how is it the case that everybody ended up going along with this Holocaust? Well, that's what we wanted to study here. And so one of the most famous studies in all of social psychology is kind of based on this. And it's asking, could we get people to do more or less what happened in Auschwitz? Could we get normal American citizens to, right, basically do the equivalent of thinking that they killed somebody? So this is Milgram's experiment, which you may have heard, the Milgram shock experiment. And so to give you kind of a description of this, Stanley Milgram, he's a psychologist from Yale University, and he wanted to find why these normal German citizens went along with this brutality. So this took place in the 60s, and he got men who were from the community. They came because they saw a newspaper advertisement which said, hey, if you come into this study, which is about punishment and memory, so we're going to shock people who misremember things and see if that teaches you. Think about this as kind of the behaviorist thing. This is all just a cover story though. And so these people come in thinking that they would be in this study on punishment and memory. What is actually being tested is how long the participant is going to follow orders, shocking this other participant or this other person who's not in on the experiment. So what you're going to do is what you need to focus on is that you're going to have 3 people in the study. And you have an experimenter who is running the study. This is the lab coat person, right? Let's imagine that it's me in this case as your professor here. And so the professor is going to be the one who comes out at the beginning of the study, and there's 2 people, you as a participant and another quote unquote participant who is actually a Confederate. They're just in on the experiment. So what then happens is you get randomly assigned to be the teacher. You're never the learner. It was always set up that you were going to accidentally be the person shocking the other person. So your role here, is to deliver shocks when this other person, quote unquote, this Confederate in the experimenter screws up. And they're going to purposefully screw up. So the idea is that the experimenter and the learner are in on it. They know what's going on together. You as the teacher, the participant, don't know. What we do here is we hook up the Confederate, we hook up this learner to a shock machine. And this shock machine goes from 15 volts, imagine if you touched a 9-volt battery to your tongue, about 2 of those, to 450 volts. And you don't necessarily have to be a genius with electricity to know that that is incredibly dangerous. And so the learner was a middle-aged man with supposedly a heart condition. The participant actually watched the learner get hooked up here, and right before the actual experiment started, we unhooked the Confederate. He never was getting shocked. We played, a recording of him that said, "Let me out, let me out. This is, I don't want to be here anymore." And all we are going to do is have the teacher, me in the study, tell you that you must continue. So, kind of a recap. You're sitting in a room with me. I'm over here, you're over there, the door is open. You could theoretically get up and leave anytime you want. Every time the person in the next room gets an answer wrong, which they're doing on purpose, but you don't know this, you're going to have to shock them and shock them more. And eventually they're going to say things like, "I don't want to be shocked anymore." So you're now in a situation where there's somebody telling you to continue, but you don't want to. And here's the box that you had to use. And you'll notice there's some levers on this. And so each one is going to be a different voltage, right? So, and they're named things like slight shock, moderate shock, strong shock, all the way up to, right, extreme, danger, and 3 X's, right? That does not sound good. So what happens when it's getting shocked? Well, at the beginning, the participant is just going, "Hey, this doesn't feel very good." But once it starts to get up to strong shock, this participant is going, "That's all, get me out of here. I told you I have heart trouble, get me out, I want out." As we keep going out, they start to get more severe. "My heart's bothering me. You have no right to hold me. Let me out, let me out." So again, you're sitting here. Somebody is telling you, "I don't want to be shocked anymore. You are shocking me. Please stop shocking me." So you turn to look at me and you say, "I don't want to shock anymore." And I just say, "You got to keep going." That's it. I say, "You must continue. There's no permanent tissue damage," things of this nature. I don't say, "Right, if you leave, I'll call the cops." And eventually this person goes silent. If the person is silent, what happened? Did something go wrong? Well, the experimenter says, "Treat no response as a non-response and deliver the next highest level of shock." What? They might be dead. And so I have the video here. I'm not going to play this for copyright reasons. However, right, there's a link down here. If you Google the Milgram experiment, you'll find more or less it. And so I ask people, usually for the first time that they've heard about this, well, this is what we predicted. So Milgram predicted that once people start saying, "Hey, I want out," people are going to leave. But, right, what happens, right, once they get to the silent point? He's like, "Yeah, nobody's going to obey because they all realize that." How do you think it's going to happen? Do you think that's what's going to happen? Well, if you know what happens, the joke being that it's actually shocking how many people obeyed. Everybody obeyed at the beginning. People were still obeying even when this person started saying, "Let me out, let me out." When it got quiet, 25% of people stopped. 3/4 of people kept going. Beyond that, only 1 out of 8 more people left. And so by the end, almost 2/3 of participants shocked a person to the point that they thought they killed him, simply because they were told that they must continue. You see how messed up that is? And now imagine if you are being prosecuted for this. Imagine somebody made you do this, and it was real, right? And you murdered, right? You killed somebody in this case. And the prosecution says, "Why didn't you leave?" And you say, "I was scared." And they say, "Well, did they have a gun to your head?" And you say, "No." That's how powerful obedience is, listening to authority. Now, there's a lot of other things in this, right? We want to be correct, and we know that the experimenters tend to be correct. That's informational influence. Normative, we want to be liked. We don't want to rock the boat against the experimenter. Beyond that, we have diffusion of responsibility. We justify that it's the other person's fault. The experimenter is the one running this experiment, not me. And even the foot in the door, we didn't start off by saying, "Hey, can you shock somebody at 450 volts? We started by 15 volts. Oy, oy, oy. So that's your quick primer on the 3 types of social influence: conformity, compliance, and obedience. But let's move on to attributions, an interesting thing. How do we explain why people do the things they do? How do we know things about people? If, right, how do I know that I think you're lazy or smart or a hard worker? Well, we have to make attributions. We have to attribute certain traits to who you are. And, right, look at these two groups of people. Do you think these two groups of people are alike? Do you think they like the same things? Probably not. So we're already making judgments about these people very quickly. And I want to talk about three kind of ways in which we judge people differently than ourselves. So the first is what we call the fundamental attribution error. So when we are looking at other people, we think that anything that they do is caused by who they are. So imagine that somebody cuts you off in traffic, right? This happens all the time, especially in Florida. You are probably going to think that they're a jerk. That's who they are. But you've probably cut somebody off in traffic before. And if that happens, you probably don't say, wow, I'm a jerk. You probably focus on situational thoughts. You probably say, well, actually, I just didn't notice them there. I'm not a bad person. So we attribute other people's behaviors to their personality, but we often fail to think about the situational factors here, right? We overweigh the dispositions versus the situations. We don't necessarily think about maybe this person is speeding like a crazy person down the highway because their loved one is in the back and needs to get to the hospital, right? That would be an actually okay reason situationally for them to do this. But chances are we think they're just a crazy person. Could be, could not be. So the fundamental attribution error is when we look at other people, we tend to fundamentally focus on dispositions, who they are, not the situations it could be. Compare that to the actor-observer effect. The idea that when we're focused on our own behavior, we think about the situational factors. And when we're focused on other people's behavior, we think about the personal cause, right? So, this idea of when it's about ourselves, we're so kind to ourselves, but when it's about somebody else, we say, wow, that must be who you are. The great example of this, being my genetics is the cause of my weight gain, but yours is due to your ice cream, right? That's because, that's something that you should have done better. But, this is kind of making it so that, you're not feeling so bad about yourself. You want to think about who is it you're looking at, right? So if you and I are both walking down the street and we both trip at different times, and I see you trip, I'm going to say, that person's such a klutz. And then if I trip a minute ago, I'll go, the ground's really screwed up here, right? So I was saying that, it was some other reason that caused it. It's not who I am. So the best way to think about this is, are you focused on the actor or are you focused on the observer? And it might differ here. The final bias of these three is the self-serving bias. So what happens when bad things happen to us? Well, we tend to think about how it was external. It's due to other reasons. If you do bad on an exam, you are going to think, more likely, the professor wrote that exam too hard, than you are to think, wow, I'm a bad student. But think about if you did good. You wouldn't be thinking, wow, the professor didn't do so good. Right? This great comic, nobody thanks God for when they lose a sports game. They only thank God for when they win a sports game. So when we ask people after sports games, hey, coach, how'd you win? Why did you win? Well, when they win, they say, well, it was all this hard work. It was everything that we put in to make ourselves great. But when they lost, they focused more about less about internal attribution. So maybe more things like, well, the other team was just so good today, or, maybe the weather caused us to not play so good today. Externalizing how things are different. So again, thinking about these three attributions here, fundamental attribution error is focused on other people. Actor-observer effect is looking between us and others. And the self-serving bias is looking at ourselves. And the idea here is we are always going to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, but we're not going to give other people that same benefit of the doubt. Cruising right along, let's talk about attitudes. Attitudes are weird, right? Because like we know what an attitude is, but it's not that type, right? It's not you having an attitude. That's more of a mood. An attitude is an evaluation of something. It's just a mental way of thinking about something, people, things, ideas, right? And you have positive or negative views on all three of the things I've put on the screen here. Some positive, some negative, maybe they're all positive. If they're all negative, what's wrong with you not liking Nutella? But so the idea is that an attitude is how we like or dislike any object, anything in our minds. So attitudes are made up of three different components, the ABCs. Attitudes are made up of an affective component, emotional component, right? Thinking back to emotion. So attitudes have a component about how we feel about something. Do you like spiders? Do you dislike spiders? You probably have a reaction to them emotionally, probably negative. Behavior, how do you react to this? Spiders, only right for this situation, you probably either kill it, run away from it, maybe you don't mind it, right? How you act. And then cognitions in emotions are going to be your knowledge and understanding, your perceptions, your beliefs, what you know, what you think, what you believe about the stimulus. Do you think spiders are scary? Do you think spiders are going to hurt you? And so all three of these components make up our attitude, right? So we see a thing, we see a spider, for instance, we evaluate the thing. I don't like that thing. I want to go away from that thing because I know spiders could bite me and that hurts. And so I dislike that thing. Keep it away from me. So where do these come from? How do we gain our attitudes, right? Well, part of it is genetic, right? You think all the way back to when mom is eating different foods, spicy versus non-spicy foods, prenatal programming. That's part of it. We're also experiencing direct conditioning here, right? When we're classically conditioned. Many of us don't like the taste of children's Tylenol because we associate it. We have a negative attitude of that tastes yucky, right? We've also got this idea of social learning where mom and dad show us what is okay or what is not okay here. And so with this, though, we have an important question to ask. What happens when your attitudes and your behaviors don't match, right? So what happens if you don't like spiders, but this spider is helping you to catch all the bugs in your house and he's kind of off in the corner? A more interesting question comes back to what we talked about in the first chapter, where there was this social psychologist who realized that a cult was believing that the world was going to end pretty soon, and it was going to end in a giant flood. And this psychologist, Leon Festinger, he was like, what happens to these people who are convinced that the world is going to end? What happens to them the day after the world doesn't end? Do they all just say, I was wrong, and that's it? No, they don't, right? So what happens after the saucer comes? Festinger predict that the people who really believed are going to actually believe more in the lie. What? And this is cognitive dissonance. And so this is the idea that, we maybe prefer comforting lies to the unpleasant truths in our minds. And so to describe cognitive dissonance, I kind of have to explain cognitive consistency first. And it's the idea that we want our attitudes to match, right? Like if I want to think of myself as a good parent, right? I want to think about, I want my behavior to match that. I don't want to also be beating my child, in which case maybe my behaviors and my attitude or cognitions don't match, right? So we want to maintain that consistency between these things. In the same way that if you are a music, somebody who likes music, you know that certain notes make good sounding chords, right? So you want those things to go together. That's consistency. What happens when there's inconsistency? What happens if you have a dissonant chord, a chord that sounds wrong because the notes don't go together? What happens if I, yell at my child and I rate behavior in the and my part of my attitude, my cognitions are good parents don't yell at their kids. What happens here? I'm feeling a negative thing, and so we're going to change our attitudes here. So when we think about it, though, what is easier to change? Is it easier to change my attitudes, my cognitions, or my behaviors? Well, I can't go in the past and unhit my daughter, but what I could say to myself is something like, well, every once in a while people get mad. I don't hit my kid, and that's a terrible excuse. But the idea is that when we have certain beliefs and our behaviors don't match, it makes us feel bad. We know that smoking cigarettes is bad for your health. People still smoke. So, what do they do when they think about that? Well, that's leading to this inconsistency. I know that smoking causes cancer, but I smoke. That makes me feel bad. So there's a couple ways I can handle this. I could change my belief. Smoking isn't going to kill me. I'm fine. I could change my action. I'm going to stop smoking. Or I can change my action perception. This idea that, well, smoking is bad, but I only do it because it relaxes me, right? Which of these is easier to do? Not the action. It's hard to change your behaviors. If it was, there'd only ever be one book for dieting, right? I want to be skinnier, but I keep eating. Well, what do you do? Well, it's hard to change our actions, right? So sometimes we will just change our action perception, right? Maybe make it okay to us. And so recognizing that our attitudes are going to be made up of these three components and really be affected by that. And the reason we talk about attitudes here is because they actually directly tie into this idea of stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination. So when we talk about the ABCs of prejudice, right, you think about seeing an individual like this, you probably have a stereotype that comes to mind. Well, we just use the attitude theory. So our affective component of attitudes, that emotional component of attitudes, is what we would also call prejudice. It is the emotional response by just looking at somebody and prejudging them, having a like or dislike of them just based on their look. Now, if you saw this individual on the side of the road, you might walk to the other side of the street. A discriminatory action because you changed your behavior, right? So the behavioral component of attitudes is a discrimination. And we also have different beliefs or thoughts or schemas about this individual, right? That he is homeless. He might have a home. We don't necessarily know that. But this idea that there are certain characteristics that some or all of those group members have. The question, though, is aren't stereotypes just schemas for people? Right? And what's so wrong with that? There's a lot, right? If you think about like Borat being the stereotype for what Kazakhstan is, that would be like going to a one-light town in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and saying, this is America. It's not necessarily fair. Is it true that everybody in Florida is an old person? I'm not, right? So I'd like to think I'm not. You imagine people from different countries also have different stereotypes about Americans, right? These stereotypes suggesting that we swear all the time, that we have many beautiful girlfriends, lots of money, guns. Like, I don't have any beautiful girlfriends. My wife would be upset to find out, right? This idea that Hollywood, it's about Hollywood, they're loud mouths, eat a lot of junk food. Okay, that one's kind of true. But, right, this idea that they're not exactly always right. And once we make a stereotype, it's hard to remove it. It's hard to change it from what it is. And these stereotypes have been used to justify terrible, racist, and unjust practices throughout American history and other history. And so I have to then talk about this. It's kind of a weird thing because stereotyping is a major factor in prejudice and discrimination, but it's not necessarily a bad thing overall. When we focus on people, it can be a bad thing. But right, if I put you in a building and I said, here's two animals, which of these do you want to go next to? You're going to stereotype and you're going to say, I'm going to go towards the dog. Why are you going towards the dog? Well, categorize these two. This ain't a dog and these are scary. This thing is more likely to be friendly. I don't have to walk up to the alligator, listen to it growl and see how hungry it is to know that I shouldn't go near it. The idea is we stereotype because it's quick, because it's easy. And this quote from literally over 100 years ago puts it so well. The real environment, the real world outside of our brain, is too big, too complex, too fast for direct acquaintance for us to completely understand. We're not equipped to deal with all of it. So much variety, so many permutations and combinations. So we have to make it make sense on a smaller, simpler model, right? Is bad, is good. Think about it this way. What's your stereotype of a doctor? Probably a white dude in a lab coat, right? Did you think about a surgeon? Were they black? Were they just white? Was it a woman? Did you think about me? I'm a doctor, a PhD, not necessarily the doctor you want on an airplane, right? I've always joked that if that ever happened, I would go to sit up and my wife would just be like, sweetie, no, they don't want you. But to belabor this point, right? What's your stereotype of a French person and why is it this guy? It's always this guy. Is that everybody in France? No. Can a French man be a doctor? Yeah. This great quote from Mark Twain, or attributed to Mark Twain, really goes to show this, that if we go and explore the world, we meet other people. What do you learn is that everybody is pretty much the same. And so those stereotypes are often way kind of overblown between people here. And just to show you that, a really classic study did something very simple. They asked people to look at these two paintings and say, imagine, or pick one. What's your favorite one? And people picked one and said, okay, you're now in a group with people who picked the same painting as you. How much money are you going to give to people in your group, and how much money are you going to give to people in the other group? And here's a couple of the options. You want to give 18 to your group and 3 to the other group? Do you want to give 9 to your group and 21 to the other group? Do you want to give 13 to each? People give more money to their group. Why? Well, because it takes nothing to make us into groups. Groups will farm over the most random of things, right? Like if you think about playing Mario Party, where you're playing against each other and then you're in mini games together, or even playing tag as a little kid, you go from like being the out group, to having an in group, right? You're now not it and you're playing with everybody else. And we like people in our group more. If we were in class and I made us play a game of left of the room versus right of the room, chances are you would be excited if your group won, because we like our groups. We give advantages to our in-groups, the people who are like us, and we don't give advantages to people in the out-groups. This is just an automatic thing, and the more you like your group, the more you will do it. Why? Well, I like me. I like people who are like me. I'm in a group of people who are like me, so I want to be like them. A study, not even really a study, but this activity that this teacher, Jane Elliott here, did with her 3rd grade class a couple days after Martin Luther King was assassinated. She split her group of white children, 3rd graders, into high and low class groups, blue eyes and brown eyes. She said, if you have blue eyes, you're better than the brown-eyed kids, and if you have brown eyes, you kind of suck. They flipped the status the next day. For those of you brown eyes like me, we weren't totally screwed over. Now, what I want to note here is that these kids weren't necessarily competing for resources. It wasn't like, oh, blue-eyed kids get twice as much food and brown-eyed kids, good luck. There were no major differences between these groups other than eye color. And then if you watch the video, which I am not going to show, note there is some very inappropriate language used at a certain part. What you find here is that very, very, very quickly, these children start to discriminate and act prejudicial and stereotype one another as being, oh, look at you, you're a brown-eyed kid, so you're not very smart, or you don't know what's going on. It took less than a day for these kids to make themselves into groups and then put themselves on a hierarchy where I'm better than you. So this happens about just about anything, especially because the teacher made it important to these kids. She said, eye status matters. Eye color status matters. This is important. Can you think of anything else we've done in the United States' history, right? Well, there's this very interesting TikTok of Bill Nye here, where he describes the fact that if you look at the amount of UV rays that hit the Earth and you overlay it with the skin color of people, it turns out that it's really just a function of the color of, right, or where your ancestral kind of groupings came from. If you lived in the equator area, there was more sunlight. You needed darker skin to help kind of change this. So, why do we choose skin color as pretty much the major stereotype in the United States? Because it's like the first thing you can see on somebody, and that's it. It's that stupid. It could be hair color. It could be glasses versus no glasses. It could be anything you wanted it to be. And so when it comes to reducing prejudice, right, it's important to recognize we need to change our social norms to show out what is okay and isn't okay, and to send a message about what we should be doing, right, to reach out and be the person to say, hey, that is wrong. Recognizing how important that is. So that is not necessarily the most fun thing to talk about, though I do think it's incredibly important. What I do want to end here with is some talk about attraction and relationships here. So when we talk about attraction, we are talking about this process of finding somebody generally desirable. That could be physical, that could be psychological, that could be their personality, that could be other things, right? Their wealth, right? That could be an attractive feature. Does it matter what type of relationship you're looking for? Well, yeah, it actually does, right? There's differences in terms of short-term versus long-term attraction here. And one thing that matters most, regardless of anything, is proximity, the nearness of these people, which just creates an opportunity to meet these other individuals. And we're attracted to people who are near us. Think about like friends, which are clearly hidden by my face. Functional distance here, though, is what we're really interested in. Functional distance is the idea that not all nearness is equal. There's several people in my class this summer, but we're not interacting, right? You're not at all near each other. Even if you are in a lecture class, you might physically be near somebody, but you might not actually be functionally close to talking to them. A really great study looking at this noted that these dorm rooms for freshmen at MIT, there were 20 buildings of dorm rooms that were all built like this. And 2 of these rooms tended to have more friends than any other room. And it was rooms 1 and 5. Why rooms 1 and 5? Because rooms 1 and 5 had a chance to meet more people, because people from 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 had to walk down past their doors. And so it gives you more of a chance to meet people. Funnily enough, this is exactly why I was able to date my wife in high school, my right now wife in high school, is that I was sitting in the corner of the room. I had a friend here, a guy who I like to kind of make fun of, jokingly. And so this person didn't think I was funny. This person wouldn't talk to me. I couldn't talk to them. But this girl thought I was really funny, and she kept chatting with me and eventually dated my dumb rear end for some reason and married me. But right, the idea here is that what if she was sitting in the same room but up here? I never would have gotten the chance, right? It wouldn't have been functionally distant here. Now, this also brings up another point, that we like things the more we see them. This does not mean go stalk somebody, but this means, right, like maybe the first time you hear a song, you're like, I don't know. But the 5th or 10th time, you'll like it a little bit more. On the other hand, if you dislike that person the first time you meet them and then you run into them again, chances are you're just going to increase that dislike. Also, if you do it too much, right, you can kind of lead to contempt, right? If you've ever worked retail, you've probably heard a song. The first time you're like, The 5th time you're like, this is pretty great. The 500th time you're like, I'm done with this. I hate this song. So the idea here is just we like the things more that we see them. So, right, this is the idea of kind of, I don't want to say expose yourself to them, but right, continuously showing, who you are to them. More importantly, though, is similarity, especially in long-term relationships. And this can be things like age, socioeconomic status, education, but more importantly, things like opinions, interests, and values. And I often think about the old school eHarmony website, The commercials still run rent free in my brain, where you were asked to be matched on like 90 some dimensions here, right? Because if you really like walking, long walks on the beach, and you probably want a partner that does too. And if I hate going to the beach, maybe there's some more differences there. I also tell people it's probably better to be, dating somebody who agrees with you with things like, your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, whether or not you're going to have kids, how you should spend money, because those are important things to be harmonious in. However, there's also this other side, right? There is physical features of attraction. One of them is body shape, not thinness. And for both genders, right, what we are talking about is something slightly different. The hip-waist ratio for women and the waist-shoulder ratio for men. So it's interesting to note that, right, there are specific kind of patterns in this that are considered attractive for us. Part of this is probably due to an evolutionary perspective, because having a certain, right, shape suggests that you're healthy enough to carry a child. Or you're, in the woman's case, and in the man's case, you're healthy enough to kind of produce a good child / protect your offspring type deal. Something else we can talk about here, you'll notice that these three pictures look a little different. There's the same person, but something's different. This is the idea of high bodily symmetry, the idea that your face matches, right? We like people without scars or without a bunch of facial pox or marks. Gives the perception of being healthy. So here we have the A person, which is the actual face. B, we have taken one half of the face and flipped it. C, we've taken the other half of the face and flipped it. And you can see, right, how this kind of differs in terms of attractiveness. We also have this idea similar to that of averaged features, not being average, but having features that are more commonly normalized. So the idea is taking a bunch of faces and putting them together and taking the average distance between the eyes, average size of the eyes, average nose length, all of that, and putting it together. And an example of this is if you take these two individuals and you kind of add them together here. Don't know why B and C are messed up there. You'll have to excuse me there. You'll notice that people find C more attractive, which is the composite of A and B. Another factor with this comes down to what we consider evolutionary psychology and masculinity or femininity in the face. So women tend to prefer this guy over here, and men tend to prefer this gal over here, because men tend to prefer women with baby features. So features that are, as we'll kind of talk about on the next slide, more representative of things like being younger, having youth. And that's not like a weird young thing, but like if you are healthy, you're more likely to be able to have a kid and pass on your genes type thing. Women prefer men features that are more masculine, more dominant. Why? Because you want somebody who is able to take care here. So men prefer these youthful features. Think about this even in terms of like the old school comics or cartoons, because this gives the idea of fertility, youth, and a little bit more estrogen. Compare that to women who tend to prefer more dominant features, right? Like testosterone, that suggests you have testosterone, having a strong immune system, being a mature individual here. So there's a lot of things that accentuate fertility. I'm not going to name any of these, and these are not things I'm going to say you necessarily need to know. But right, notice that these are going to be things, right, bodily things that can affect attraction. For men, these are going to be different, though. Some of these are a little funny, but right, they are also going to still go into that pattern of more mature and more, accentuating strength, maybe. However, it's a mixed bag in terms of if this is universal. We do like facial symmetry. We like clear skin. We like youthful appearances. But there are cultural differences that modify these experiences. And there's this wonderful video where this woman sends a picture of herself to 27 different ad agencies across the world, and she says, "Make me beautiful." And you can see how they change the way she looks to culturally differentiate beauty. So we've talked a lot about attraction, but let's talk a little bit about relationships. So you found somebody you find attractive, and now you are starting to think about dating them. How does this work? What is love, right? What is it? Well, the best way we can think about this is that love has three distinct components, and we can see how we can plot them across time. So the first component of love we want to think about is a passion feeling. So strong or intense feelings, this feeling of longing, this like constant thinking about this person, maybe a physiological arousal, so butterflies in your stomach, maybe a sexual arousal, could be. But this is a strong feelings for or about that person. And in a relationship, this is going to peak very early on. Think about this in terms of like the honeymoon phase or puppy dog love between two people. This is going to be something that I like to think of, it hooks you together with this other person, right? Because you're now very passionately engaged with them for a while. The next kind of corner of this triangle is going to be intimacy. So again, not sexual intimacy here, but emotional closeness, bonding, sharing. In a relationship that's not going to be a boyfriend-girlfriend type relationship, we have very intimate relationships with other people, right? Like we share our secrets. You probably, and hopefully for your sake, do have an intimate, close relationship with your mom and dad. You share your secrets, you love each other, you talk about things, right? The idea here is like that this is going to increase slowly over time, but once you've kind of hooked on with that person, this is going to go up and up and up. So of course, right, like my wife and I have gotten much closer as time goes on, right? I would say that she probably knows me better than myself at this point in our 14-year relationship. The final component is commitment. So this decision to maintain a long-term relationship with somebody and your decision to love a certain other and maintain that love. Now, this could be good, could be bad, right? And what you notice is that this kind of pops way up as intimacy is going up. It does dip way later on a little bit, which is interesting, but overall it is pretty much something that lands up top. So taking these, we can actually kind of plot what we mean by love pretty well here. And this is the last thing we're going to cover, is taking these three components and plotting them out. So here we have this idea of love. And love is made up of intimacy, commitment, and passion, are three components. So a love that is full on intimacy, right? That is just sharing with this person, being close to this person, is like a best friend relationship or a brother-sister relationship, somebody, who you're close to. Right? And this is just kind of what we would expect for friends. A passion-fueled relationship with no intimacy and no commitment is really like stalking, right? It's the idea of you're just obsessed with somebody, but you don't know anything about them and you're not committed to them. I guess the best example for me is like literally a dog, right? When a happy golden retriever walks up to you and is like, "I know nothing about you, but we're best friends." That's what I kind of mean by this. Right? Imagine, on the other hand, a relationship where, imagine if my wife and I didn't have any passion and didn't have any intimacy. So we don't like each other, we don't talk to each other, we don't share anything about our day, but we stay together just for my kid. That's a relationship that's just empty love, right? It's just alone, right? It's just its own thing. So now let's start to combine these. Well, we can talk about liking and passion here, right? This idea of intimacy and passion is going to be a romantic love. So this is going to be something where, hey, I like you a lot. I know some things about you. Right? This is like the dating phase of a relationship. We have passion and commitment with no intimacy, and this is fatuous love. So infatuation, right, you might think of. Romeo and Juliet, right? I love you. I know nothing about you. We're going to get married. It wasn't a good love story if you really think about it. Right? But that is fatuous love. We also have this idea of companionate love, intimacy and commitment, but maybe the passion's gone, right? You think about an older couple who, right, they've been together for 60 years. They're not necessarily, going on dates, but they're just loving each other. They're still together. They just kind of enjoy their time. That's going to be companionate love. Finally, what about loves that are passionate, intimate, and committed? Well, those we call consummate loves, like mine. Haha. But reality is that in a true good relationship, especially in a relationship with your significant other, you want to be able to focus on these three components. Do I have passion for them? Do I like them? Do I care about them? Do I think about them? And this is something that wanes, but you can gain it back by doing things like going on dates. Intimacy. Am I asking my partner about how they're doing, about their day? Do I feel like I know them? And then commitment, right? Am I not cheating on them? Am I doing what I can to love and help them? All right, that puts us just over an hour, a little longer than I wanted for this. But if you have any questions, of course, feel free to reach out. Please let me know if there's anything I can do for you. But I hope this was useful for you. I hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you around. Bye-bye.